This is the Conservative American Message, hosted by the one and only Cam Lau. Today, I'm joined by future U.S. Congressman Kevin Virgil, who's running for United States Representative in the 4th District of Iowa. Well, thanks for doing this, Kevin. I just want to start out, if you want to just kind of give us your background, who you are, and your career, both in the military and the private sector.
Yeah, of course. So I was born in just across the Missouri River in Nebraska, but raised in Iowa, in O'Brien County. Graduated from high school in the early 90s and went to West Point right after that. Served my time in the Army after I graduated from the academy. For those who are familiar with the military, I served in the 82nd Airborne and then ultimately in the Ranger Regiment. Left the military to go into the private sector and took a job in New York. And it wasn't long after I was there. I had a job working with a bank in Lower Manhattan across the street from what was then the World Trade Center. And just by, I guess, a combination of lucky factors, I was not in Lower Manhattan when the Twin Towers fell on 9/11, but I missed being there by about 2 weeks, and that was a very formative event for me. So it wasn't long after that, I had an opportunity to reenter government service when I was offered a slot to join the CIA. Went through the training program and then spent quite a few years overseas serving again. So ultimately, left government service for a second time. Did a couple of other things, but ultimately ended up starting a business a few years ago, selling software to the private sector, but also to the Department of Defense and some other government agencies. And that company is still active today. I'm still an owner, even though I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day. So that was really sort of my first formative experience with the federal bureaucracy, and all of the inefficiency and other problems that we face with it.
So what makes you want to enter the political arena now?
It's a great question, right? I've never really had political aspirations in my life, not until very recently, right? I certainly did not expect to want to serve a third time, but there's been a lot of things happen in the last year and even the last 3 months that have changed my position on that. So, I did leave Iowa after high school to go serve, and then spent quite a bit of time, even after that. I was living in the DC area and on the East Coast after my service ended, and then along the way I've always maintained close ties to my friends and family members, and really kept a close eye on what's happening there with the with local politics here, and with I think the issue that really grabbed my attention was the carbon capture pipeline, and all of the efforts there to enact eminent domain and involuntarily force farmers and landowners to provide easement rights to a carbon capture pipeline that's being built by a company with exceedingly high level political connections, both at the national level and here in Iowa. That was the issue that really, I think, turned me into an activist, if you will. I ended up writing an article, mostly because writing helps me to wrap my head around complicated issues. And that article was published, or an abbreviated version was published in the Des Moines Register a few months ago. And that's really what brought me into former Congressman Steve King's orbit. As your listeners are probably aware, he's become very active in opposing the pipeline, the Summit pipeline, and its efforts to enact eminent domain. So yeah, it wasn't until December of this past year when he, I've been asking him, often, what else can I do to help? I've offered to help out with fundraising, to help build a legal defense against the pipeline. I've offered, we'll do whatever I can to help out with this fight. Because I think it's a critically important issue, not just for Iowans, but at the national level, and and defining what exactly do property rights mean for Americans today. And it was in early December when he called me up and asked me, "Hey, are you familiar with Congressman Randy Feenstra?" And I said, like most people, I said, "Yeah, don't know much about him, but he's a nice enough guy, and strong family man, but don't know much else. He asked, well, have you ever looked at his voting record? So I took a close look, and I was extremely surprised at what I saw. I think what I saw was the voting record of a congressman who was voting like an extremely moderate Republican in a swing state. Um, repeatedly voting to expand federal government oversight, the budget, spending taxpayer money at almost every opportunity. Repeatedly voting for legislation that violates the Constitution. And look, I think the Iowa's fourth district is certainly the most conservative in America, one of the most conservative in the country, and I think it should be the job of whoever's representing this district to take the conversation on the floor in a conservative direction. And it became very apparent to me at that time that Congressman Feenstra has not done that, and was waiting for somebody else to run against him. But by December, when nobody had done that, former Congressman King asked me if I would consider doing so. And after a lot of soul searching and a lot of praying and speaking with family and friends, I decided to announce my candidacy to run against him last month.
So you spoke about your relationship with Steve King, and I'm just kind of wondering, what do you think about the way that he was kind of treated by the Republican establishment? And do you think that you'd get that same kind of treatment?
In terms of how the Republican establishment views or viewed Congressman King, look, I think that he was, I think the McCarthy wing of the Republican Party, as in the former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, was certainly out to get him for a lot of reasons, and some that have never really been publicly confirmed. But whatever the reason, I think that there is a Republican establishment right now that is not at all interested in promoting conservative values in Congress. From the recently resigned chairman of the RNC, the Republican National Committee, on down. And the Republican Party is definitely fighting some internal battles right now as we try to figure out what the party is going to be for the next decade or longer. I definitely find my values align more with like the House Freedom Caucus. People representatives like Jim Jordan out of Ohio, or Matt Gaetz out of Florida. People who are upholding the rules of the Constitution. I certainly hope that the party is pulled in that direction going forward, because we haven't had that in a very long time.
Yeah. So the mission of my podcast is basically to try and diminish political apathy among my generation, especially. But how do you think we can solve this apathy pandemic, whether it's the education system or more economic opportunities? It just seems like nobody really cares about anything anymore. And, you're going to need young people to care and vote for you if we're going to move Randy Feenstra out of his seat.
Yeah, that's right. Look, I think that voter apathy has always been a problem. It always, for some reason, it seems to be more of a problem for conservatives than for, people who lean left on the political spectrum, unfortunately. I guess I'm somewhat encouraged by the fact that, the national level situation is so bad right now after, I don't know how you can define the Biden administration's term as anything other than just disastrous for everything from national security to our fiscal solvency as a nation. But I think those problems, I think more people are awake now than I think ever have been. I guess time will tell. We'll see how many people come out and actually vote in the primary. But the level of dissatisfaction, and I think honestly, I think that really started during COVID. As people have started to realize just how much corruption and and disinformation has been directed at them for the last 3 or 4 years, that more and more people are now activists than ever have been. And I really do hope, and I think that we're going to see more political participation this year than in years past.
Well, and especially with all these issues really being brought to the forefront that are really starting to actually affect people's lives. And I guess that's kind of what I want to talk about most of the time here, just about the specific issues and your stances. I think that's really important and basically the main thing that people should be concerned about and who they're voting for. I think your background gives you a unique perspective on all these ongoing global conflicts. So let's start with Ukraine. What do you think the United States' role should be in this Ukraine-Russia war?
Yeah, I think we can take a step back and talk about how I feel about foreign aid, and I think that's probably going to direct how I feel about any other open conflict that the Biden administration has allowed to fester during the last 3 or 4 years. As far as Ukraine goes, look, I have spent a fair amount of time in Eastern Europe in my over the last 20 years or so, and yeah, I think look, it's an absolute disaster. Like the best solution, and I really do hope that when we finally do get a new president in the White House, and I really do hope it's President Trump in November, that they move very quickly to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine and just put a stop to this. Because right now we've got a situation where we've got 800,000 military soldiers dead, to say nothing of all of the civilian casualties and all the cities that have been devastated in Ukraine, and for what, right? I mean, we now have Russia now controls more Ukrainian oblasts or provinces than they did when the conflict started. And what our corporate media desperately wants to hype in the American people is that they want you to think that Putin started this war, but yet there have been, and it's not just Tucker Carlson saying this, right? There have been senior diplomats, from European countries who have come out and said this on the record that Ukraine was prepared to back away from joining NATO a couple of years ago, right? I mean, and Russia has always considered this a red line. They specifically said they did not want Ukraine, which for a lot of geopolitical reasons, they did not want Ukraine joining NATO. Right, they consider that to be a red line. This isn't just Putin. This is Putin's political position, right? I mean, the idea of NATO or Ukraine becoming a NATO signatory country was just beyond comprehension for them. It's something they're prepared to go to war to prevent. And that's exactly what they did. And the Ukrainian government, which has been basically a sock puppet for the American neocon establishment since the Maidan coup in 2014. I think they've been prodded by the Western powers and pushed toward NATO for the last decade. And, I think once they started feeling intense pressure from Russia to back away, they were prepared to do that. But, the West has passed Boris Johnson, the former British Prime Minister, to go visit Ukrainian President Zelensky and his government a couple of years ago and basically, deliver the message that, under no circumstances will you back down. The implication was, you've been bought and paid for, and you are going to stay the course. And don't worry, we'll make sure you get all the funding and all the military support you need. We'll make sure you win. Well, that is what they tried to do, and that is certainly not what's happened, despite the fact that we've had, we've given well over $80 billion to Ukraine at this point, and the Senate just approved another just disaster of a foreign aid bill, which includes another 60 billion, I believe 60 billion to Ukraine, in addition to Israel and Taiwan, and it accomplishes nothing but just line the pockets of all the defense contractors and all of the the ammunition manufacturers that have been supplying these weapons to Ukraine that the Russians have been destroying almost as soon as they reach the battlefield. It's just an absolute disaster, and it does nothing for anybody but for the American military industrial complex. And look, I'm all for a strong national defense. I think it's arguably our highest national priority. It's the highest, best use of our federal government. But this idea that we should just be funding foreign wars as a way to play geopolitical power games, it's just it's destroyed our reputation and our ability to project power in the 21st century, right? Just about every war that we've entered into since the turn of the century has just been an unmitigated disaster, and they've all been instigated by these Washington insiders who just all need to go away.
So do you feel the same way with Israel that we need to back out there and not have so much tied up in the Middle East, or is that a different situation?
It's, I mean, I feel broadly the same way in that I think I struggle to understand how giving more foreign aid to Israel, a country which has a lower debt to GDP ratio than the United States, puts America first, right? I've been to Israel several times, right? And I know the country well. I know a lot of the people well, and I am a huge fan of Israel and the people there. I believe, it's like every other country in the world, they have an absolute right to defend themselves against both foreign and domestic enemies. I do not believe that giving, U.S. financial support to Israel at a time worth $34 trillion in debt, and just, further digs the fiscal grave that we're digging for ourselves. That doesn't put America first. And I also fail to see how, giving them another, I think 14 billion was what the Senate wants to do. I, 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 I don't believe there are any clear objectives attached to that. I think it's just another example of a blank check that the defense establishment wants to send abroad. So, yeah, look, I know Israel is it's a very sensitive issue in the minds of many Americans on both sides of the political divide, and I feel the same way. But I'm at the point now, and I think that many conservatives feel the same way I do, in that it's time to put America first and stop funding all of these foreign wars.
Okay. Moving on to abortion. What do you think of like a top-down federal limit ban on abortion or something of that nature, or whether you think we should just be leaving it up to the states like the Supreme Court has left it now?
Yeah, I think we're in a good place with this. I mean, personally, yes, I am a strong believer in that life begins at conception. We had a federal ban on abortion, and that has now been modified to the point where, I think the Supreme Court, widely, in my opinion, has pushed that decision down to the states, right? It's it is now, it's states and communities who try and prosecute violent crimes, right? Which, I mean, at the end of the day, many states believe that abortion is a violent crime, and in that case, it should be considered as such. And I fully support that, but I do not believe the federal government should be in the business of regulating or banning abortion. I think that runs counter to the 10th Amendment, right? Which is another, I think, an amendment that I think we have lost our way as a country in terms of our compliance with it. So I also believe that, under no circumstances should any federal funding ever be used to offer abortion services to civilians or the military or anybody else.
What is a constitutional approach to this LGBTQ nonsense that keeps going on and growing, affecting our youth? I know you're a man of faith, and my faith as well plays a big part in how I feel about that issue, but we also have to look at
Right.
this constitutionally.
Well, I guess I'm not exactly clear on where the Constitution applies to, a particular self-identified class of people, like identified as, by sexual preference or gender. So maybe you can explain.
I guess, I think the transgender part, most of us understand that should be separated out, that doesn't make any sense at all. But as far as, gays, lesbians, people being able to love who they want to love and that kind of thing, is that something that should be protected, or is that something we need to crack down and define marriage as being between a man and a woman?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we had that for a long time, and this is also something I just don't believe the federal government should be in the business of regulating, right? Nor do I believe that the federal government should ever step in to favor a so-called protected class, which certainly is what a lot of states and municipalities seem to be flirting around with at the moment. Everything from putting a transgender or self-identifies transgender men into women's sports, or allowing biological males to use the girls' bathroom in schools, which is just it's just abominable to me. Look, I think that, I mean, taking aside my view, which is that I do believe that, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of evidence that the majority of self-identified transgender individuals will suffer from profound mental health issues. As we've seen, most of the mass shooters we've seen in this country in the last year have all been self-identified transgender. I think there's definitely a correlation there that we need to be paying very close attention to. But I don't believe that, providing any class of people with special protections, serves anyone's interest.
Sure. So you also mentioned school shootings, and
Mhm.
that's been a real hot topic lately. It seems like that continues to be a bigger and bigger issue. And are we in danger of losing any of our Second Amendment rights over this as more regulation is passed? Or do you think that that's not something we have to worry about?
No, we always have to worry about it, right? I mean, we always have to be vigilant. There are many powerful forces in our country that would love nothing more than to erode and ultimately take away our Second Amendment rights. I think, we have to be eternally vigilant for this, which is why, organizations like the NRA exist. And I'm a Second Amendment absolutist, right? I will never vote for any legislation that limits an American's right to bear arms under any circumstance. I mean, and look, I think every time there is a mass shooting or some sort of, it's like gun violence in this country, there's always the immediate call by the left to to limit gun ownership, saying it's a sensible thing to do, but they're not addressing the root cause of the problem, right? What America faces right now is a profound mental health crisis and a profound erosion of values and community, which is bring people to the point where they feel that like the logical thing for them to do is to go is for a kid to go, I mean, heaven forbid, shoot up a school or or go conduct some sort of mass casualty event. There was a time in this country, when I was very young, when there was much more robust mental health infrastructure that where we cared for people like that, and there would come a point where if somebody was a danger to themselves or to those around them, they would be they would be removed and put into facilities or institutions, given the power, given the care that they need. Obviously, there were a lot of horror stories that came out of those, some of those institutions, which I think ultimately reduce the appetite for this country to have this sort of mental health infrastructure. And now, unfortunately, what we have is, like in a lot of our cities today, a lot of elected leaders, mostly Democrat-run cities, think the compassionate thing to do is just to let these people sleep in the street, which I can tell you firsthand is not the right way to go. We we need to stop talking about eroding Second Amendment rights because, like I think we know that there was a time in this country when there were much stronger community ties amongst friends and neighbors. The gun violence was actually quite a bit lower, and we certainly didn't have these mass casualty events. We need to address the root cause, in my opinion, which is really taking a close look at mental health and the dire state it's in today.
Well, and I think our education system is just so lacking. It's causing a lot of these issues in all of these different categories. A lot of people are starting to talk about whether we should end the Department of Education entirely. And, states like Iowa, we've passed a lot of school voucher programs. So, what do you think is the solution to the education system?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, right? Which the Department of Education has its existence has no basis in the Constitution. The idea that a federal Department of Education should be responsible for directing how like education should be regulated in a country of well over 300 million people today is just insane. Again, now we're getting back to talking about the 10th Amendment, which states that any powers not specifically granted to the federal government shall be delegated to the states or further down to to our communities. And education is definitely one of those areas. So yeah, I think that we have no need for a DOE. Obviously in Iowa right now there's an ongoing debate around the AEAs and the services they provide. I think that's an important debate to have at state level, not the national level. But look, I think it's very intuitive that the best oversight a school or an educational institution can receive is from the parents and families of the kids that go there. Full stop, right? I think that's and we're getting back to your voter apathy issue here, but I think that's if parents were much more involved and applied much more scrutiny to their local school boards, I don't think we have any of the problems we're having today. I think that's just looking at some of the headlines that are coming out of schools, like the materials that are in they're in libraries for young children to see. It's just insane. And this is just I think we as an American people have we become lax in paying attention to what our schools are teaching their children, and we've allowed like a fifth column of, well, let's call them what they are, communists to infiltrate our educational institutions, starting with the universities back in the 60s and 70s. And for the last 50 years, they've metastasized and moved into our high schools and now grade schools. And this is what we're dealing with now. We have a pervasive communist element that is trying to destroy our country's fabric within, and they're doing it by trying to brainwash our kids and teaching them just reprehensible values. And it's going to take a long time to reverse that trend, but we have no choice.
Absolutely. Yeah. So marijuana is a big topic. And so I just don't know what your thoughts are on federally legalizing marijuana or what you think about that.
Again, I think this is a state sovereignty issue. I do not believe there should be a lifting of the federal ban on marijuana. I think it should be delegated down to each individual state. Look, I'm certainly not a fan of pervasive marijuana use. I think if you walk through a lot of cities today, it seems like every street corner has at least one smoke shop. And it's just like the smell, and I just think the side effects of marijuana are much more, I think, certainly long-term effects are much more negative and much more profound than this emerging cannabis industry wants everyone to believe. Look, yeah, I don't believe it should be regulated at the federal level, nor do I think it's something that should be celebrated.
So what do you think is your number one priority in Congress of everything altogether? What's your number one focus when you get there?
Well, that is the easiest question you've asked me today. I think that's our gravest national security threat today. And the issue that is I'm most passionate about is the out of control federal bureaucracy that we're dealing with today, right? It's we currently employ over 3 million people in the federal government, which is well over 1% of the adult workforce in this country, which is it's a number that hasn't changed since World War II, really. Meanwhile, out here in the private sector, the average worker today can accomplish the same amount of work that 2.5 people had to do in the post-war period, thanks to advances in technology and productivity. But the federal government has never gone through that process of becoming more efficient, right? And the results are obvious, right? I mean, I think there are a lot of cultural norms, things that we just come to believe are true with the federal government that I don't think are true. This insane idea that if a particular office in a random federal bureaucracy doesn't spend its entire budget for the year, then that's somehow a bad thing and they're penalized for not spending all their money. I mean, are you serious? Like, when did this become acceptable? Like it's just the most counterintuitive logic, that should hold true in a capitalist society or in a market economy. Like bureaucrats should be rewarded for finding efficiency and doing their job well rather than being penalized for it. The second is that once a federal employee has a job, they're essentially in that job for life, and they've got a defined benefit pension, which almost nobody in the private sector has anymore, right? They've got more protections than most people in the private sector will ever have. And and I can say, firsthand from having spent a lot of time, working within the federal government or, from the outside, working with it. There's a level of arrogance and entitlement that, with a lot of these federal employees that they develop over time, like they deserve it, even though they have better benefits and arguably certainly don't work as hard as a lot of their private sector counterparts. So I think we need to have a complete rethink of the federal government, and I think we need to see at least a 50% reduction in its headcount as fast as possible. In addition to just bankrupting us, because of the incredible burden that all of these employees put on the rest of us taxpayers, right? We're seeing increasing signs that the bureaucracy is being weaponized against us, and left unchecked is going to change our culture forever. So we are in a crisis right now at a national level, and our highest priority should be reining in this bureaucracy and cutting it down to size, and returning it to a configuration where it exists to serve the American people instead of the other way around.
Okay, so before we go, I want to make sure that everyone is clear on when this election is. So the primary election between you and Randy Feenstra does not take place during the regular general election in November. So what is the date for Republican voters to come out and support you?
So the Republican primary in Iowa's 4th District is on June 4th. And, for people who are familiar with the political spectrum here, that's the most important election for this seat, right? It's, Iowa's 4th District is routinely seen as a seat Republican seat. And whoever wins the Republican primary, it's not a done deal, but it's that they are generally expected to win. So for those who are interested in learning more about me, they can go to our campaign website, which is virgilforcongress.com. Virgil will see my position on all of the major issues that the federal government faces today. And you can also see a schedule of events where I'll be around the district. We're out there talking to as many people as we can. My opponent doesn't like to publish his event schedule for reasons you'll have to ask him why, but I do believe that I want to get in front of as many people and have an open forum and allow people to ask me any questions they want, so they can, come out and see me at any of those campaign stops on our event website.
Well, thanks for being on the show, Kevin. This is great. We'll link all that up so everybody can find you and get more involved with the campaign. Thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate you all. Have a great week and stay conservative.